Have you ever pulled the trigger on no contact, thinking you were simply protecting yourself, only to discover that you had unknowingly set off an emotional chain reaction that would ripple through both your lives in ways you never anticipated? The moment someone decides to cut all communication with another person, whether it's an ex-partner, a toxic friend, or a complicated family member, they become the architect of a psychological phenomenon that extends far beyond their own healing journey. Understanding the emotional chain reaction you cause when you go no contact isn't just about satisfying curiosity. It's about recognizing the profound power dynamics at play and how two specific psychological forces, reactance and the illusion of control, can transform your decision into an intricate dance of human behavior that would make even the most seasoned psychologist pause in fascination. When someone goes no contact, they aren't merely stepping away from a relationship. They're fundamentally altering the psychological landscape for the other person in ways that trigger ancient survival mechanisms buried deep within the human psyche. The person on the receiving end doesn't simply accept this new reality with grace and understanding. Instead, their mind begins working overtime, attempting to make sense of what has happened, desperately trying to regain some semblance of control over a situation that has been entirely removed from their influence. This creates a fascinating paradox where the very act of seeking space and peace inadvertently becomes the catalyst for intense emotional turbulence in another person's world. The beauty and complexity of this psychological chain reaction lies in its predictability. Yet most people who initiate no contact remain completely unaware of the specific mechanisms they've set in motion. They imagine that their silence will simply fade into the background of someone's life, becoming nothing more than a quiet absence. But human psychology doesn't operate with such simplicity. When communication suddenly stops, when access is abruptly denied, when the familiar patterns of interaction are shattered without warning or explanation, the human brain responds as if it's facing a fundamental threat to its understanding of reality itself. Throughout this exploration, we'll delve deep into the intricate psychological processes that unfold when no contact begins, examining how reactance, that rebellious surge that emerges when someone feels their freedom has been restricted, combines with the illusion of control to create a perfect storm of emotional chaos. We'll uncover why the person you've cut contact with might become more obsessed with reaching you than they ever were when communication flowed freely, and how their mind constructs elaborate narratives and strategies in an attempt to restore what they perceive as their rightful access to your attention and presence. This understanding isn't about judgment or manipulation. It's about recognizing the profound psychological forces at work when human connections are severed, and how these forces can either support healing or create additional complications that extend far beyond the original relationship dynamics. Picture a woman named Serena, not unlike Serena van der Woodsen from Gossip Girl, who had spent months entangled in an on and off relationship with someone who seemed to drift in and out of her life whenever convenience called. The relationship had become a source of constant anxiety, with mixed signals, cancelled plans, and emotional unavailability, creating a cycle of hope and disappointment that left her feeling depleted and confused. After months of analyzing every text message and dissecting every interaction with friends, Serena finally reached her breaking point and decided to implement complete no contact, blocking the person on all platforms and committing to radio silence. What Serena didn't anticipate was how dramatically this decision would shift the entire dynamic. Within days of implementing no contact, something remarkable began to happen. The person who had previously been distant and inconsistent suddenly became laser-focused on reaching her. They began showing up at places they knew she frequented, sending messages through mutual friends, and even creating new social media accounts to try to view her profiles. The same person who had treated her availability as a given, who had taken her consistent presence for granted, was now consumed with the challenge of reconnecting with someone who had become unreachable. This transformation wasn't coincidental or romantic. It was psychological reactance in its purest form. The moment Serena removed herself from easy access, she had inadvertently triggered a psychological phenomenon that occurs when people perceive their freedom or options have been restricted. The human brain has an automatic response to perceived limitations on freedom, and this response often manifests as an intense desire to restore whatever has been taken away, regardless of how much that thing was actually valued before it disappeared. But the plot thickened as weeks turned into months. The person trying to reconnect with Serena began engaging in increasingly elaborate schemes to regain contact. They started analyzing her social media activity patterns, trying to decode hidden messages in her posts, and developing theories about her emotional state based on minimal evidence. They convinced themselves that if they could just find the right words, the perfect gesture, or the ideal timing, they could break through her no-contact barrier and restore communication. This wasn't just persistence. It was the illusion of control manifesting in full force. The illusion of control had convinced them that Serena's decision to go no contact was simply a puzzle to be solved rather than a boundary to be respected. They began to believe that her silence was a test, a challenge, or a strategy rather than a genuine attempt to create space and heal. Every small sign became evidence that she was secretly hoping they would fight harder for the connection. Every mutual friend who mentioned her name became a potential messenger or source of intelligence. The person who had once been emotionally unavailable had now become completely consumed with the project of becoming available again, but only because availability was no longer an option. As the months passed, Serena observed this chain reaction from a distance, initially feeling validated that someone was finally showing the level of interest and effort she had craved during their relationship. But soon, she began to understand that this intense focus wasn't really about her at all. It was about the psychological challenge she represented. The same person who had been indifferent to her emotional needs when she was accessible had become obsessed with solving the puzzle of her absence. This realization became both liberating and sobering as she recognized how powerfully psychological reactance and the illusion of control could transform someone's behavior without actually transforming their character or capacity for genuine relationship. Understanding these psychological mechanisms becomes crucial for anyone considering or currently implementing no contact, because awareness of the chain reaction you're potentially triggering allows for better preparation and clearer boundaries. The first essential principle to grasp is that the intensity of someone's response to your no-contact decision often has an inverse relationship to how much they valued your presence when it was freely available. This seems counterintuitive, but it perfectly illustrates how reactance operates in human psychology. When someone becomes unreachable, the human brain automatically assigns greater value to that connection, not because the relationship has actually improved, or because genuine feelings have suddenly emerged, but because scarcity creates perceived value. Think about Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You. His obsessive behavior intensifies dramatically when his target becomes less accessible, not because his capacity for healthy love increases, but because the challenge activates his need to control and possess. This same mechanism, though typically less extreme, operates in the minds of people who suddenly find themselves cut off from someone they had grown accustomed to accessing. The practical implication of this understanding is that the attention, effort, and apparent interest you might receive after implementing no contact should be viewed through the lens of psychological reactance rather than genuine change or renewed appreciation. Someone might send heartfelt messages, make grand gestures, or promise significant changes, but these behaviors are often motivated by the psychological discomfort of restricted access rather than authentic transformation or recognition of your worth. The second crucial insight involves recognizing how the illusion of control manifests in the other person's behavior and learning to maintain your boundaries despite increasingly sophisticated attempts to re-establish contact. The illusion of control convinces people that they can influence outcomes through persistence, strategy, or the right combination of actions, even when the situation is entirely outside their control. This leads to behavior that can appear romantic or dedicated on the surface, but actually represents an inability to accept another person's autonomy and decision-making authority. You might notice the person attempting to reach you through mutual friends, showing up at locations where you're likely to be, or carefully crafting social media posts designed to capture your attention. They might begin analyzing your online activity for clues about your emotional state or receptivity to contact. Some people become amateur detectives, convinced that if they can just gather enough information or present the right argument, they can override your decision to maintain no contact. Much like Emily Cooper from Emily in Paris, who often persists in pursuing connections and opportunities even when faced with clear resistance. People experiencing the illusion of control believe that determination and creativity can overcome any boundary. The key to maintaining your no-contact boundary during this phase is understanding that engaging with any of these attempts, even to clarify your position or ask them to stop, typically reinforces their belief that persistence might eventually work. Each response, no matter how brief or discouraging, provides evidence that their strategy has some effectiveness. The most psychologically sound approach is complete consistency in maintaining no contact, recognizing that any deviation from this boundary can reset the psychological adaptation process that needs to occur. The third essential element involves managing your own emotional response to their escalated behavior. Many people find themselves feeling guilty, flattered, or confused when someone begins showing intense interest after no contact begins. There's a natural human tendency to interpret increased attention as evidence of increased value or genuine care, but understanding reactance and the illusion of control helps reframe these responses more accurately. When someone who previously took you for granted suddenly seems unable to function without your presence, remember that this shift represents their psychological discomfort with restricted access rather than a sudden recognition of your worth. The intensity of their response is actually proportional to their previous level of entitlement to your availability, not to their genuine feelings for you as a person. Someone who truly valued and respected you would have demonstrated that appreciation when you were accessible and would respect your decision to create space when you needed it. The fourth crucial consideration involves preparing for the long-term psychological effects that your no-contact decision might have on both parties. For the person cut off from contact, the combination of reactance and illusion of control can create a sustained state of psychological preoccupation that might persist much longer than expected. They might develop elaborate internal narratives about your relationship, your current emotional state, or your reasons for maintaining distance. These narratives often bear little resemblance to reality, but serve to maintain hope that contact might eventually be restored. Understanding this dynamic helps explain why someone might continue attempting to reach you months or even years after no contact began, and why their attempts might become more sophisticated or emotionally manipulative over time. The illusion of control doesn't simply fade away when initial attempts fail. Instead, it often evolves into more complex strategies based on the person's growing theories about what might work. For your own psychological well-being, recognizing these patterns helps maintain clarity about your decision and reduces the likelihood of being swayed by particularly compelling attempts at contact. When someone has had months or years to craft the perfect message or gesture, It's easy to forget the original reasons that led to the no-contact decision. But understanding that their improved communication or apparent insight might be more about psychological reactance than genuine growth provides a more realistic framework for evaluation. The ripple effects of going no contact create a psychological chain reaction that extends far beyond the immediate relief of removing yourself from a difficult situation. By understanding how reactance transforms absence into perceived value and how the illusion of control can turn healthy boundaries into perceived challenges to overcome, you gain crucial insight into human behavior that serves both your current situation and future relationships. The person you've cut contact with isn't necessarily a villain for responding with increased interest and persistence. They're simply demonstrating predictable psychological responses to restricted access. But recognizing these responses for what they are protects you from misinterpreting their meaning or allowing them to undermine your commitment to your own well-being and healing process. This knowledge empowers you to maintain your boundaries with confidence, understanding that the intensity of someone's reaction to your no-contact decision often reveals more about their relationship with control and entitlement than about their genuine feelings for you. The chain reaction you've initiated by choosing no contact will eventually run its course, but only if you maintain consistency and resist the temptation to engage with the various strategies that psychological reactance and the illusion of control might inspire. Your decision to implement no contact was an act of self-respect and self-preservation. Honor that decision by understanding the psychological forces it has set in motion and remaining committed to your own healing journey, regardless of how dramatically or creatively the other person responds to your newfound unavailability. The most profound gift you can give yourself is the recognition that your worth doesn't increase because someone finally notices your absence. It was always there, waiting for you to protect and honor it through the boundaries you choose to maintain.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.